Hello everyone, welcome to the 155th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'll be discussing veganism, souls, bodies, information exchange, and just in general, the whole idea of where people arbitrarily stop when they deconstruct the reality because they're uncomfortable with ethics, morality, and all these tough questions. Today I'm talking to you from the Czech countryside, where part of my family is living, so I hope you enjoy the scenery. So I've been watching some interviews recently, discussing plenty of different topics, including veganism, on the fact of not eating meat. And there's a big kind of tension even in spiritual circles between people that say that it's okay to eat meat, the ones that say that it's not okay, and I just like to weigh in on this whole discussion. The first thing I wanted to talk about is a thought experiment. Like imagine the following. Imagine if we humans are actually being harvested or planted for our souls. That is, there's this higher kind of being that has an interest in living certain experiences, and it can't do it on its own because it's in oneness. And so it splits it into several souls, and then it says, I'm going to plant a soul into this vessel, which is just, flesh and bones, nothing alive there. Give it a consciousness, give it everything, and it's going to have, I've already decided, before that entity is born, that the soul is going to have a certain number of experiences. And these can be experiences ranging from all kinds of things. Friendship, violence, sadness, all kinds of stuff. And regardless of what you do in your life, you will experience these because these are so high-level overarching things that you can choose whether you want to live on an island, whether you want to live in a country, whatever language you want to speak, whatever you want to do, you're going to end up experiencing them because, you can experience sadness anywhere. You can experience violence anywhere. You can experience being depressed anywhere. And then at some point, the higher kind of being decides, well, that's good. The soul has accumulated all of the experiences that I wanted, and then just, death comes, you die, the soul goes back up to the higher being, and the higher being feasts on the soul, eating it raw. Delicious soul with so much beautiful experiences that was lived as a human. Delicious. I'll add a little bit of salt and pepper. That was so delicious for me. And you see, the reason why I'm playing around with this thought experiment is that ultimately that's kind of how it is. But I've just tainted it with human ideology, human values, ethics, all kinds of distortions that paint it in a very dark light. That is, that ultimately this planet is just a kind of giant, maybe 5-star warehouse, and we're all just being harvested as humans here for some kind of higher purpose, having experiences, emotions, and all that stuff that is, stocked, or, how should I say, memorized or stocked in our soul. And then once the soul has gotten what it was here to, once a higher being that was in charge of planting that soul into us as humans, once that being thinks that, you've grown to your full potential, just like, a cow reaching a certain age and the meat is really nice and juicy and fresh and everything. And it says, whoops, that's it. Let's kill that human. I've got what I needed. and now I can get my nourishment. And that's one way of looking at it, but is it the best way? I've had another thought experiment that I can discuss. Imagine if ultimately the universe is not physical at the outset. It's more immaterial, more like living thoughts, like living abstract entities. But these entities didn't really have like this defined boundary. They didn't know how to experience each other. They didn't have any sensory material, like, you know, the sense of touch or smell or taste, any of these things. Oh, a lot of wind here. I hope you can still hear me though. And so they decided to create a physical universe just so they could create very sophisticated biological bodies with all of these sophisticated sensors in order to be able to have the same kind of sensory abilities. And so they're waiting for humans to sort of grow, or humanity to grow and reach a certain level of development to harvest our bodies. So, you know, imagine like they plant this little physical seed, Big Bang, all of that stuff, and from their vantage point, all of this, for us, it's like billions and billions of years. For them, because they're atemporal, they just watch that grow like we would watch a plant grow and reach, you know, its full size within a few weeks or months. And then once the fruits are ripe, whoops, they just pluck it and, you know, have a go at feasting off of our delicious, mature bodies that are now evolved enough to be able to, well, how should I say, like incarnate or hold a higher portion of consciousness than just these very limited, you know, selves, you know, human selves. And ultimately, I mean, that's what we've been doing. Like, basically, if you look at the whole evolution from the Big Bang to us, it's creating vessels that can hold or contain more and more dense levels of consciousness. I would put it that way. That is, animals, they can host a certain amount of consciousness, but humans can host much more because we're living in this, you know, ideas, concepts, juggling with all that stuff. So, and we have multiple personalities, all kinds of things. And the whole purpose of the universe up until now was just to evolve us to a point where our bodies would be ripe to be harvested by aphysical entities. And again, this thought experiment is just to say that if you only view the universe through the lens of predator-prey, who gets eaten and who gets to eat, who is the victim, who is the perpetrator, then, you know, you may think that we're ourselves as humans, we're being harvested for some kind of higher purpose that we don't understand. Just like, you know, cattle may be completely oblivious to what is happening. They just know they're suffering. They just know that they're suffering, and they don't understand why. And they're there for these weird-looking, godly creatures, well, that think that they're gods, that feast off of their dead bodies and treat them in cruel ways. But, you know, that's just, to me, it's a very limiting way of looking at things. A third little thought experiment I'd like to play with is this idea of, so imagine like if life at the very outset, once it took the form of a living cell, the living cell sort of had a moment of clarity into the future, and it said, oh wait, from myself as a building block, I can also create these very terrible and violent creatures like tyrannosaurs or lions, hyenas, tigers. And then the living cell said, I don't want any part in that. I will tweak my inner, workings and DNA or whatever, so that the only thing that can be done with me as a building block is, plants and maybe a few, vegetarian animals. And that's it. None of that violent business, no bears, none of that stuff. But then the problem is, that's like gutting a certain number of notes from your scale because you don't like the sound of the notes, or because it sounds dissonant or something to your ears. And ultimately, what happens is you don't manage to then make the bridge between one octave and the other octave. You don't manage to, make that gap, bridge that gap. And so, like I said, like humans are the bridge between the material and the immaterial world. I've been saying that for a while now. The bridge between biology and the world of ideas, concepts, thoughts, abstraction, things that are immaterial. And imagine if that living cell, because it decided to be judgmental about, carnivores and all that stuff, it went into an evolutionary cul-de-sac. That is, it couldn't create highly evolved, from that kind of mix, of different creatures, it couldn't evolve them to a point where they would be able to serve as the bridge between the biological realm and the world of ideas, like humans. Well, that's a pickle. And that's a shame. And so another way to look at all of this that I've been, all of these thought experiments that I've been saying, is that ultimately, if you want to deconstruct the universe, even beyond your ethical kind of limitations as a human, then you can view anything as just purely an exchange of information, and that's it. And there's no value attached to it, no ethics, no morality, no nothing. It's just an exchange of information. It's just, when you get yourself slapped in the face, the atoms on your cheek just update their, state into another state, energetic state, and the hand that slapped you, the atoms on that hand also update their states, and that's all there is to it. And what's crazy is that ultimately, a human is like matter that has a preference for its state, which is insane. It's like your atoms, they prefer to be in a state where they're not slapped rather than slapped. But if you look at, atoms inside a rock, they don't care whether they're slapped or not slapped. And that's what's insane, is that all that the universe has created is pockets of information that prefer to be updated or changed in a certain way rather than another, which is really the miracle here. And so, instead of looking at things with the dualistic perspective and the carnivore kind of lens, we should look at it through the lens of information exchange, and especially through music and harmony. That is, it's true that the interaction of certain notes together are disharmonious and are dissonant, and that's very true. The point is, it's not about never playing that note again. It's about understanding how to harmonize it with other notes. And so, but also, the fact that there is a dissonance in playing two notes is maybe part of the learning experience of learning how to make harmonious music. You have to test things. And so, humanity has experimented with industrial farming, which I agree is quite dissonant. But let's just say that it's like a way to learn that treating reality in that way is going to hurt us eventually and come back to bite us one way or another. That is, eventually we may find ourselves in a situation where we ourselves are just harvested. And that is kind of what's happening today, because like I've explained in some of my other videos, you can think of humans and the human mind as being a fertile soil in which ideas are born. And then ideas have a life of their own, and they're called egregores in the spiritual realm. But they are living entities. They're not like this dead, passive little thing. They're as alive as you and I. They're just immaterial. They reside in the immaterial realm. And so, as of now, right now, you can think of many human minds as being in an industrial kind of factory for serving ideas. Like almost like in these huge warehouses of people that are being harvested by, dictatorship or Republican ideology, Democrat ideology, the woke ones, the anti-woke, the pro this, the anti that, the communists, the capitalists. And the reason why that's being done is because this is all a fractal. So what we do to the realm below us happens to the realm, happens to us at a realm even further. That's the logic of a fractal. Like what you do is just like repeats itself and scales up. And so now the universe has experimented with that kind of fractal and it says, that doesn't yield very good results. Let's try something else. But, ultimately, it's also a kind of a balancing act. That is, what I mean by balancing act is, if you create an imbalance in one extreme, you also have to create a balance in the other extreme. So, it's like if you bring a vibration of this kind of phase into this reality, you have to create a vibration of opposite phase to compensate for the distortion that you've created. Because ultimately everything is still in perfect symmetry in the absolute. And so in the relative, whenever you bring something out from the absolute into the relative, and you sort of create that imbalance, it's created on both sides. So if you create the concept of good, it'll create the concept of evil by symmetry. If you create the concept of a predator, it will create the concept of prey. All of these things just are perfectly symmetrical always, except unconditional love, of course, because that one is, it's the circle. It's the circle, it's the perfect equilibrium, and doesn't have really an opposite kind of. But yeah, I won't go too farther into that. So yeah, when we think of industrial farming and all these animals and animal cruelty and eating meat, think of it as an exchange of information. You are ingesting information and updating your inner state of being. And so, ultimately people can experience being manipulated by egregores from above and feeling how disharmonious that is to them. Or they can eat animals that have been treated in that industrial way and feel that as well, via cancers, via ulcers, via all kinds of diseases that they'll get because they're eating unhealthy foods. And this is the only way for the universe to evolve, because without humans there's just no way to feel ideas, to feel, these things, and to sense whether they're positive or negative. Because understand, it's like, imagine playing a video game, but there's no human there to look at the video game and say, oh, this is good or this is bad or this is, because we have all of these preferences thanks to our mortality, our limitations and everything. Abstract ideas use humans to be able to know, to be able to harmonize themselves. That's the only way they can do it. And they can harmonize from above or from below, and it's the same. It goes to the same thing. So I'm not saying that industrial farming, yay, let's just all cultivate cows, treat them, grow them in labs, and then kill them off and all that stuff. Even like this artificial lab-grown meat, it contains the information of the whole process of coming into being as, artificial meat. And that, when it is ingested, it is information that you're ingesting. It's that kind of information. And basically, the point is for you as a human to be able to choose whether that is an experience that you want to have. That's the way you want to be treated, and that's the way that you want the fractal to grow. And the way you think about the information that you ingest is also the way that you're treated as a human from the level upwards. But, having those experiences was not a mistake. That's what I'm trying to say as well, is that it's again one of those things that is there in our evolutionary journey. And in the future, eating meat should be a decision that is based on pure harmony considerations. And what I mean by that is, again, I've said this many times, but when you are a certain note on the piano, the notes that resonate with yours are not the same, because you're not the same note as a human. And so some humans, their bodies actually need meat. And I mean need as in real necessity. That is, it is a vibration or an information that they need to ingest into their existing pool of information, because it'll bring them something that may be difficult to explain at a human level, and has nothing to do necessarily with very physical things like proteins and whatever, nutrition values. That's maybe the form that it takes, but it's much beyond that. It's way beyond that. It's maybe something to do with, like, imagine if you have a very, very you're somebody that's, for instance, extremely violent, extremely impulsive, you have a big issue with violence. And eating meat is something that quenches that kind of deviant or behavior that is within you, or something that you can't contain or can't control. And instead of going about rampaging everyone and killing and all that stuff, you can contain those kind of impulses and problems by ingesting meat. And that's just a temporary fix that we have, because as humanity we don't have maybe the means or an alternative methods to deal with those impulses right now. And so it's the best kind of therapy that we have, and fine, so we have to use it. And so it's in the future, it's not going to be like there's going to be this one, and that's always the fantasy, right? That we have this one universal answer for everyone. Everybody's going to be happy with eating vegetables or eating this or quinoa or whatever, vegan, gluten-free, whatever. It's really to go even much, much more granular, and for each person to sort of know instinctively, okay, this is going to be good for me, this is going to be bad for me. And there is no universal way of knowing what it's going to be. It can switch and vary from day to day. And maybe today it's going to be red meat, and for the next week it's going to be all vegan and gluten-free and whatever. And then the next month again it's going to be chicken, and so maybe we'll evolve past the state where we need to eat at all, because we will be able to sort of nourish ourselves in different ways. But for the moment, that's the way it is. So I'll give you like the baby metaphor and the child metaphor. So even if the baby is uncomfortable feeding on its mother, because ultimately it's eating its mother from the inside, it doesn't have a choice in the matter. It has to do it, otherwise it cannot stay in the dimension that is the womb. Its consciousness, its soul will just completely exit its mother's womb if it chooses to stop feeding on its mother. And for us humans, for humanity as a collective global organism, if we stop feeding on this planet, we will not be grounded here anymore. And like people will say, well, yeah, obviously you're going to die if you don't eat for a week or something. But that's, again, the form, looking at the form. But looking at more deeper reasons, it has to do with the fact that yeah, I mean, you have to continually ingest the information of this planet to be rooted in this planet. Otherwise, your consciousness just escapes and goes elsewhere. That's the whole point. But after birth, the baby still feeds on its mother, but in a completely different way. Completely different way. You can think of it as switching from being a blood-sucking vampire to being a vegan, kind of baby, because it only feeds on its mother's milk, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't eat the mother's blood, And the same for children, that's just a fractal above. Like a 5-year-old kid can't say, well, I'm not going to eat anything my parents give me to eat. Because, well, I don't know, for whatever reason, and it will just starve itself to death. Well, that's also not very smart, and it won't be able to stay alive in that dimension of living in its parents' homes. And once a child turns like 18, 20 or whatever, and leaves the parental nest, then they get to have much more freedom in how they sustain and feed themselves in the world. And if their parents were, only eating meat all the time and they don't like it, they can switch to vegan, that's totally fine. But if they try to do it while they're still at their parents' home, well, and starve themselves to death, But again, there's a little bit more flexibility introduced. I mean, as a kid, you can say when you're 12, please, Mom, can you buy, some more zucchini and some more salads? And, you may get your way partially. And then at our level, that degree of freedom is even higher. And we have so many ranges of choices here. But the thing is, it shouldn't be based on ideology. It should be based on the needs and knowing what you are as kind of information, what you need as information ingested into you to complete and to resonate with who you are or what you are. And as soon as you transform that into an ideology that is meant to harmonize everyone's behavior to conform to what you prefer, don't forget that, again, you are playing with perfect symmetry here. So, if you create a pro-vegan movement, by symmetry, an anti-vegan movement or a pro-carnivore movement is going to be created by symmetry. Whereas, if you only say, you know what, I'm going to focus on what resonates with me, there is no opposite to that, really. I mean, and it's between you and yourself, so everything is self-contained in your own kind of, field, and there's nothing that is escapes kind of into your outer reality, where perfect symmetry sort of creates the anti or the pro to your own movement. And most shifts in humanity have been done in that kind of way, where, switching from the horse cart to the car didn't require people to create these anti-horse cart movements or pro-car movements, forcing people to do X or Y. But it just happened naturally when people saw that it was the best option for them, personally, not based on some kind of overarching, objective, universally accepted kind of rule. And finally, I'd like to say that that's the whole thing with spirituality, is that ultimately deconstruction of reality and of who you are as a human being always happens based on how comfortable you are with certain things. And you can juggle in non-duality in plenty of topics, except those where you have something like really personal or that's really touching you as a human. And you'll be able to speak, in relative terms about many things, and then on some terms you're really hard bent and you can't let it go. Because as I said, like Eckhart Tolle also says, everything is just a dance of molecules. It's all just an exchange of information with no good, no bad. It just so happens that you as a human are a vessel that has its matter with preferences, that prefers to be updated in certain ways rather than other ways. And the danger is to try to create a universal truth out of that when that's not necessarily possible. And so, And it's not a problem per se. It's just that you should be like honest with what your limitations are, and just say, look, like here where I'm speaking from, it's not the absolute truth I'm trying to sell you. It's just that this is something that is at heart, and I can't see it in a non-dual way, and that's totally fine. Like, I wouldn't be able to see, like, I don't know, like, imagine if one of my kids got kidnapped and raped and something. I wouldn't be able to say, oh, they just got their information updated. I mean, come on, let's not be ridiculous. But at that point, it's important that you make the distinction between acknowledging your personal feelings and how you feel about something, and then going on a crusade of trying to convince everybody else to think the same way that you do. And that's like two totally different things. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video and you got some interesting thoughts about veganism and all these normative kind of normative ideologies or movements. Talk to you in the next episode. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you have any videos you want to send my way that you'd like me to comment on, feel free, and talk to you next time. Bye guys.